All right, Antonio Neves, welcome to the podcast, brother. I'm excited to have this conversation, man. Thanks for hopping on.
Look, I have a big smile on my face. I'm excited to be here as well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And so I would love to start off if you could give sort of the listeners an idea of like what was life like for little Antonio running around in your early days, sort of, fill us in there.
Little Antonio, I grew up in a small town in Michigan. I grew up in one of those towns, frankly, where people just don't leave. They didn't have to because this is back in the day, man, when there were good factory jobs and those types of things available.
Yeah.
I grew up in a blue collar family. My mother was an administrative assistant, worked for the same company for over 30 years. My dad worked at factories, got his hands dirty every single day. The kind of dad that loved overtime. Like I feel like nowadays people hate to work overtime. My dad hoped
Yeah.
there was overtime and he could get that time in. But at some point as a kid, things shifted a little bit. My parents got divorced when I was
Hmm.
6 years old. And before I graduated from high school, Stu, I moved up to 15 different times. Between my mom and dad are six different divorces. They've been divorced six times. And so I was always searching for something in my life.
Dang.
And I always knew that experience, I did not want that to be me. I knew there had to be another way. I was fortunate enough growing up that sports, in many ways, were my parents because it provided that structure,
Hmm.
it provided that discipline, it provided that kind of parental authority that I craved so much. And I was the guy that was determined to leave and was fortunate enough to be a first generation college student, found his way to Western Michigan
Yeah.
University, and went on to accomplish a variety of things. But a lot of that was seeded with the instability that I experienced early on, knowing that there had to be another way to live this life.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting too that coming from that kind of an experience, there's always two ways you can take a situation, right? One, it's like this is what my life's going to look like, right? I'm going to, maybe get into relationships throughout my life and get a divorce and, live that life. But you kind of took it the other route where you're like, I'm definitely not going to live it. I'm curious, what do you think made you take that stance on it and go, I'm not doing this?
That's a good question. And I wish I really knew the answer because I mentioned the instability, I mentioned the divorces, different trauma that we can experience, emotional abandonment. I mean, there are times I lived in a shelter for battered and abused women and children. And
Dang.
I think the difference that for me, Stu, is that certain people showed up in my life at the right time. I'm sure you've
Hmm.
experienced this as well.
Yeah,
Those angels,
absolutely.
if you want to call them. When I was in sixth grade, I remember I, I was angry. I was sad. I didn't know how to deal with these emotions. And I think I was going to turn that proverbial wrong corner. But someone showed up and changed my life. And that was my sixth grade teacher, Mrs. Hirschman. And Mrs. Hirschman did something very simple. Why she did it, I don't know, but she cast me as the lead in the sixth grade production of the Nutcracker. And
Very nice.
dude, that did something to me because I felt like that was the first time in my life that somebody believed in me.
Hmm.
And by her believing in me slowly but surely, that taught me how to believe in myself. So for me, it's no wonder that today I'm an encourager, I'm a
Yeah.
coach, I do leadership and development work. And I've been really fortunate that throughout my life, these people have showed up in different stages. They've been coaches, they've been Mrs. Hirschman's in sixth grade. They've
Yeah.
been mentors, leaders, etc. And I've always had to be reminded, and I have to remind myself today, even as a man in his early 40s, that people are willing to help us and we have to be willing to ask for that help. A
True
12-year-old
that.
boy wasn't willing to ask. Thank goodness that person showed up. But nowadays, as an adult, again, people are willing to help us, and we must be willing to be vulnerable to ask for that help.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the biggest silver linings sort of in my life in massive relation to that is not being afraid to ask someone for help or to reach out or like, the worst that happens is you get a no, right? The best that happens is your life changes, a door opens, an opportunity is created. But if we sit there wondering, are they really going to care what I respond to? This, that, or the other. It's like you'll never know. Like super interesting random thing. I was yesterday watching this show. It's called The Undercover Billionaire. And they
Grant
basically
Grant
have
Cardone.
yeah, Grant Cardone's on it, some other people, and there's one of the three people that on is on it. She poses as this person that is a no one. She's got like 8 Instagram followers, and she literally reaches out in it was in Tacoma. She reaches out to this person that's running for the Senate and sends her a DM and is like, "Hey, I just moved into town. I'm trying to figure some stuff out. And this woman running for Senate literally gives this lady a place to sleep at her house,
Wow.
like from a DM. And you're like, okay, you're telling me humanity is not good. Right? It's like so it just goes to show that if you're willing to put yourself out there in whatever form it is, like you do that often enough, someone's going to go, if you're coming from an authentic and a genuine place, right? Someone's going to go, okay, Antonio, like, I'll throw you a help here. Let's see what comes from this. And, if you can really show up after they give you that, a lot of doors can open. So
You hit the nail on the head. The key thing is you have to come from an authentic and from a genuine place, not coming
big
asking for
time.
something. Not to jump too far ahead, but that was the game
Yeah.
changer for me when I moved to New York City. I have the cliche story of moving to New York City after college with less than $1,000 in my bank account. Listen, this is before LinkedIn, Twitter, Snapchat,
Yeah.
Instagram. None of that stuff existed, man. Uh, but what made the difference for me early on in New York City was reaching out and requesting informational meetings. And I was so naive. I was reaching out to people with really big titles that, the SVP and VPs, and
Yeah.
asking for, hey, can I have 15 minutes of your time to learn about your story? Not tell you about me, but to learn about your story. And I was blown away by how many people said absolutely. And they gave me 15 minutes. And as you know, that 15 minutes typically turns into 30 minutes or
Yep.
45 minutes.
Of course.
And at some point, they're going to say, hey, enough about me. Tell me about you. What are you looking to do? And yes, was I rejected? A lot of people said no, sorry, kid.
Yeah.
But a lot of people said yes. So I focus on the folks that said yes.
Yeah. It's, the saying ignorance is bliss. It's like if we could just for a day take away all the judgments and all the expectancies that we have, like they say, if you assume, it makes an ass out of you and me, right? ASSUME.
Right.
And so it's like if we could just strip those away from us a day and just come from an authentic place, it's interesting to wonder what beautiful things could come. And so one thing that I want to jump back a little bit in your story is, so obviously you went off to college, first of your family. Congratulations on that. That is huge.
Thanks,
And
man.
you graduate and all of a sudden you're working at Kraft, you're selling cheese. So what I want to hear from you is so you're going to college, and how does that go from I'm at college, this is what I'm studying, to being at Kraft? Like, what was that process like to you deciding to do
Yeah, well, first, you're one of the rare people that actually knew that I worked for Kraft Foods. So kudos on your
that?
research. I was fortunate after my sophomore year of college, I had an internship with Kraft Foods in Detroit, Michigan,
Huh.
and I maintained really great relationships from that internship. And after college, reached out to those connections, and I was able to land a job with Kraft Foods in South Florida in the Fort Lauderdale area.
Hmm.
And I was a sales representative. I was responsible, man, for 25 Winn-Dixie grocery stores. But to be clear,
Huh.
the reason why that job happened is because of the relationships that I
Yeah.
maintained after that internship. I would always send handwritten notes to the people that I worked with, keeping them up to date what I was doing. Hey, I'm not coming back this next summer because I'm interning at Disney. Hey, I'm studying abroad. Hey, I graduated. Anything available in South Florida where I
Yeah.
strategically wanted to be at the time. But I landed this job with responsible for 25 grocery stores. The gift and the curse for that job, Stu, was that I didn't go to an office every single day. I think that's probably why I'm a business owner, entrepreneur now, because
Yeah.
my office was the car and it was the stores that I was responsible for.
Right.
And I did that job essentially selling cheese, man, for over almost a year. But at some point doing that job, and it was the good job everybody tells you about, the job you're supposed to
Yeah.
get, the 9 to 5, that again, the white collar job that no one had in my family, the job with the 401k, the job with the benefits, the job with the company car. I had this sexy Ford Taurus. Um,
Very nice.
what was the most challenging thing, Stu, was that I had the good job everybody talks about, and I was miserable, man. I wasn't happy. But the contrast, that this is wild. I'm sure you'll appreciate this. Even though I didn't enjoy the job, I was thriving at it. It was
Mm.
going good. I could have had a future. And as I like to tell people all the time, especially those people who are beginning their careers, is that, and this is one of the toughest things for people to get, man, and that is just because you're good at something doesn't mean that you're supposed to be doing it. Stu, I'm sure you've met people, professionals all over the course of your life that are great at what they do in a certain job or position, but they don't enjoy it at all. And
Yeah.
that was a big lesson for me. I was thriving at something, but I wasn't enjoying it. And I knew in the back of my head that I always wanted to work in the entertainment industry and I always wanted to be a storyteller. And I always felt this tap on my shoulder saying, this is a good job, man, but this isn't your
Yeah.
job. And I did the scariest thing one could do, man. I quit that job after almost a year. Family, friends, everybody said, you're crazy. You made it, and moved to New York City again with less than $1,000 with the goal of breaking into
Yeah.
the television industry. But just briefly, I got to say one of the blessings of that job with Kraft Foods, and you'll appreciate this, is the
Free mac
amazing,
and cheese.
yeah, free mac and cheese. But you'll appreciate this, was I had to learn how to communicate with people because I had
Yeah.
25 grocery stores I was responsible for. And every manager at that store was different. Every dairy manager was different. Every meat manager was different. And it caused me to develop some relationship building skills that I otherwise would have never have developed in real time, how to truly connect to different types of people with different agendas. And that served me well and still does to in my life.
Yeah. And I think kind of two things I want to look at in there is like one, just the realization that what got you that job was your relationship. And I think it's so interesting that as you're saying over those 2 years, sort of from your internship to landing the job, you would do just random things to just poke and say, hey, I'm Antonio, just like, let me stay top of mind. Hey, I'm here. This is what I'm doing in life. Not even as much of like, hey, like, let me add $1 million to your company or like add this massive value. It was just like, hey, we worked together for a little bit and I want to maintain this relationship. And I've seen such um, a silver lining in my life as well of like, just by keeping those relationships in just the slightest little way, some way later in your life, that comes back to adding value to their life, adding value to their life. And so I just think for anybody that's listening to this right now, we need to make sure that they put a massive emphasis on what relationships have you built maybe in the last couple years, and what can you do to maintain that? Can you send them, like you said, a handwritten note? Like nobody sends handwritten notes. So if they get a handwritten note from you, they're going to go, oh my God, like there's something about this guy, Antonio, that I'm just going to keep him on the top of my mind, because who the heck writes handwritten notes, right?
Yeah, a
Um,
couple things, Jeff, just briefly. The handwritten note
yeah.
is a game changer. I mean, I didn't know it at the time. And I mean, I didn't realize I had my own little CRM. I didn't know that at the time.
Yeah.
But what I tell people all the time, especially young professionals beginning their career, is don't be deletable. Yo,
Mm,
I get it. You have a job interview, you have that informational meeting, and we're casual. We'll send that email. Thank you for the time, blah, blah, blah. We'll send that text message. We'll send a DM. That's cool. You took the time to say thank you. And guess what? That person can delete that on their phone immediately. As you just said, there's something about you getting that handwritten note with that personalized stationery, going to the post office, the stamp, and mailing it, that you just stand out. You become all of a sudden memorable. And like you said, as I was reaching out to these people on a mostly probably a quarterly basis,
yeah.
one, Jay-Z has, when Jay-Z retired and then came back, he has this line in one of his songs. He says, allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is Hope.
Yeah,
So I believe that we have to
for
regularly
sure.
reintroduce ourselves to people. No one wakes up and thinks, "What is Stu doing right now?" What
For
does
real.
Antonio do? They don't think that. So it's my job to stay on the radar, and when possible, in that note, there are times I actually would share an article. This is back in the day. So I'd cut out a magazine article. Hey, Kevin, hope you're doing well. I'm studying abroad in Spain this fall. I saw this article in Ad Week. I thought you would like it. Hey, take care, blah, blah, those kind of things. So add
Right.
value when you can as well.
Yeah. And so again, if you're listening to this, ask yourself right now, who are 3 people you can write a handwritten note to? Go to the store, go to the gas station, wherever you are, find a couple postcards and send those to a couple people, right? Find creative ways to stay in touch. And so now we're in this place, you are realizing I'm good at this, but that doesn't mean it's what I'm supposed to do. And there's this tap on my shoulder. And I think that is such a key thing as well, because so many times in life, I think many of us, we get that tap on our shoulder and it's easy to go, nah, like, yeah, I hear you. I feel that tap, but like, that's freaking uncomfortable, or that's weird, or that doesn't feel, it's kind of scary. So I'm curious for you, like, what made it so that when you felt that tap enough times, finally you were like, I'm doing good. I'm at a stable job. I'm making good money. I'm, at this job that my family sees me as this successful person that's doing really well, but I'm going to listen to this tap over what I've created. Like, what made you finally be like, I'm going to New York with $1,000 in my bank account?
Yeah, I think at first it was something just innate. It was also the feeling sick on Sundays when I knew I had to go to work the
Ooh,
next day and feeling that on a
yeah.
regular basis. Uh, I
Quick
don't,
question. Do
yeah,
you think Sunday scaries are a sign that maybe what we're doing is not what we're supposed to be doing?
100%. I've always saw the statistic and I've never found the actual research to back it up, but I want to believe it. And it says that most heart attacks happen on Monday mornings.
Yeah,
And I
that
don't
is
know if
true.
that,
Yeah,
yeah, if there's
I've
like
heard
that's a
that.
coincidence that people are going to do things that they don't want to do, the angst and the anxiety. So yes, if you're feeling that on Sundays, like you're like you feel that like that anxiousness, that regret. I'm about to go begin another week of doing something I don't want to do. Yeah, man, that's real. I felt that. I don't know what it is, Stu, but I always at some point I always realized that I had a say in my life.
Hmm.
And I think sometimes when we feel that taps on our shoulders, what we can do is we can sedate. We can start spending
Yep.
time with people that we shouldn't spend time with so we can get away with that feeling. Some people spend too much time watching television, again, to sedate so we don't feel that tap on the shoulder. Other
Right.
people will have that drink or two. All it takes for me, by the way, man, is one glass of wine. If I'm feeling any type of angst or anxiety about something that I should be doing, if I have one glass of wine, it goes away. So I invite people to
Yeah.
ask, where are they potentially sedating in their life to make that feeling go away? I've always kind of felt like I have one shot, man. And even back then as a young kid, and the one who had quote unquote made it, I knew it wasn't it. And my spirit was talking to me. I don't know if it was God, you name it. But I even had this
Yeah.
vision,
Yeah.
man. And today I talk to people about this whole idea. I believe that a tombstone can have three dates: the date that we're born, the date that we settle, and the date that we die. And as you know, there is a long gap sometimes between the date that people settle or give up and the date that we die. I've always said, Stu, that I didn't want to have this mediocre status quo kind of life. And what I mean by that is I'd rather go out and fall flat on my face than not try. Like I
Hmm.
never wanted to have that what if. I always knew I could get that job back at Kraft again. I always knew I could get that good 9 to 5.
Yeah.
What I didn't know at that young age was that will I ever get that opportunity to take that risk and move to New York City? And just lastly, a point that I think people need to hear is friends will say things to us like, oh, it's never too late. It's never too late. Stay for one more bonus. Stay for that promotion. It's never too late. True. But we have to add something on to that, Stu. And that it's never too late. And the longer you wait, the harder it
Mm.
gets. If I stayed at that job, I would have got promoted. I would have made more money. I would have accumulated more things that I probably didn't even want in a way that made it that much harder for me to leave. So, just for those folks who think it's never too late, it's true. But the longer you wait, the harder it gets.
Yeah. Yeah. One interesting that I've heard in the same sense of that is, they say most people die when they're 25, but you're not buried until you're 75.
Listen, say that again, man. Whoa.
Yeah. Yeah. Most people die when you're 25, but you're not buried till you're 75. And it's like, in the sense, I know you got the book coming out on Autopilot. It's like, it's sad. It gives me goosebumps to say it that there are a lot of people out there that are going on that autopilot. Um, so kudos to you, man, for listening to that little voice inside of you. We wouldn't be here today if you didn't do that. So
Oh my good, what you just said, and just to give some folks an example, for people who don't know if they died, right? If they died yet, there's an exercise I like to do with people in workshops, on
yeah,
stages, that
please.
shows up in my book, and it's called the last 30 days. What I invite people to do is to think about the last 30 days of their life, and if you have a job, ask yourself this question: if based on the last 30 days at work, your manager, your boss had to make a decision to rehire you, would they say yes? Or would they hesitate based on the last
Mm,
30 days? That goes back to how we are showing up in our life. That question right there, Stu, can go to relationships. If you happen to have a boyfriend, a girlfriend, significant other, if your partner had to make a decision to recommit to you based on the last 30 days, would they immediately say yes or be like, you know what?
yeah.
Maybe we should keep dating, but I don't think we should get married just yet, right? And because I like people to think about, from a career perspective, think about when you first got that job and you were interviewing for it, how excited you were when you found out you were a finalist, when you found out you got the job, how you
Yeah.
showed up that first month, how you showed up that first quarter. How much of that man or woman still exists today? I found that when I reached that point at Craft, that a lot of that person did not exist anymore. He was not as fired up. He was not really tuned into it because he knew he should have been doing something else. So some people need to recommit to what they're doing, and some people need to make different decisions.
Yeah. I love that. So let's say now we jump forward a little bit and we're going to kind of fast forward through some stuff, but you moved to New York. You're saying, I'm pursuing entertainment. I got this tap. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. You end up being in that industry for what I think it was about a decade.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, and I'm just purely curious on this one. What was one of your favorite moments through that decade? Because I know you worked for Nickelodeon, you did some stuff with them, which is like, I'm like, that's epic. That's so cool. I grew up, watching them. I'm curious, just throughout that decade in the entertainment industry, what was one of your favorite things you look back on and you go, man, that I'm gonna remember that.
As you mentioned, I worked in the television industry in New York City for 12 years. I worked for big
Yeah.
networks like Nickelodeon, like NBC, like PBS, BET networks, you name it. I was on
Yeah.
TV. A couple of things jump out. Again, being a small town kid from Michigan, it meant a lot during my Nickelodeon days and even days when I was doing stuff for like E News when my mom could turn on the television and see her son. Like I knew that meant
For
so
real.
much that she could turn on her TV, especially during Nickelodeon days, every day at 4 or 5 o'clock. She could see me doing my thing. That was absolutely huge, and that felt good.
Yeah.
But I think about a moment that really, really stands out to me, man, is this was the early, probably towards the end of my Nickelodeon days. Me and some buddies went to a New York Mets baseball game. And what we love to do was get like bad seats to go in the bleachers, get a couple of beers, and just sit back and watch the baseball game because we love baseball. But this happened to
Yeah.
be the game was packed one day, and I had a hat on covering my dreadlocks up and glasses. But one kid noticed me, and then a few other kids noticed me. And before you knew it, man, in the midst of this big baseball game, I'm surrounded by all of these kids giving autographs on
Oh my God.
baseballs. Uh, and I have a picture of that moment as well. My buddy took, and that was a moment where I kind of felt like rightly or wrongly, I kind of felt like I had made it. Again, I was maybe seeking external validation. That's a whole other conversation. But that was pretty doggone cool, man. That here I am, giving an autograph at a New York Mets baseball
Yeah.
game. But I can tell, I can't. I mean, I can go on and on and on about the amazing
Right.
Grammy, Oscar award winners, politicians that I've interviewed with, interacted with. Those are huge moments as well.
Yeah. So one thing I think is kind of interesting and a great transition perfectly into what I'm curious about next is it's interesting as I hear you say that this moment with these kids was almost like created massive fulfillment in you in a sense of like, wow, like I'm contributing to the lives of all these people and I'm bringing a smile to their face. Like I'm doing good in this world. And one thing that's interesting that I saw in your story is, you were in that industry for 12 years and eventually you kind of, again, like it sounds like you are an extraordinarily self-aware person. And at one point you went, I'm mentoring some of these people that are on the TV sets and this brings me a lot of joy. And that sounds like that was sort of a pivotal moment for you that said, maybe because I'm getting more joy from this now, that it's time to turn to another page. And I'm curious if you could walk us through kind of what was that process like as you went from being in that industry for 12 years to then, kind of taking a big pivot, going to do corporate speaking and things like that.
Yeah, well, I mentioned the validation thing there for a moment, the external
Yeah, yeah,
validation. At
please.
some point, again, as you mentioned, being self aware, when I started doing the quote unquote work, if you will, personal development workshops and these different things back in
Yeah.
2009, it quickly became very obvious, dude, that in many ways I went into the television industry for, I don't want to call it the wrong reasons, but for kind of interesting reasons. I went in
Hmm.
there to be validated. I went in there because when someone put me on TV, when I got hired, all of a sudden I felt like I was of worth, that I was of importance. Prior to that, there was no other way in life I could feel that. And so I looked externally for people to validate me. And it's, as
Hmm.
you know about the television industry, man, it's a cutthroat industry. I've been fired from jobs. It's tough to get jobs. But then all of a sudden you're depressed, you're down, then somebody says you, and all of a sudden you feel good again. And I found
Yeah.
myself only feeling good when somebody picked me, that network, right,
Huh.
to be on that show. And I became aware of that. And at some point, as you mentioned, I found that I was actually getting more enjoyment behind the scenes, developing young professionals on the sets and in the studio, helping them with the writing, helping them with professional stuff, helping them write their handwritten notes, helping them have informational meetings, etc. And I
Yeah.
realized I've gotten to TV for the wrong reasons to be validated and decided to pivot and go pursue leadership and development work. And that began back in in 2012. It's funny, few years back, I was giving a talk on a college campus too, and a kid came up to me after the talk and he said, "Hey, man, I noticed that on the social media platforms, you have that blue check mark. You're verified on Twitter and Instagram
Yeah.
and all that fun stuff." He says, "How do you do that?" And I got ready to give him the answer. I was like, and tell him how I used to work in television. So of course,
Yeah,
public
yeah.
personality, blah, blah, blah. But something told me don't go that direction. I said, well, why do you want to be verified? He says, well, just to show that it's me. And I'm like, is there another you that I should be aware of? I was like, why do you really want to be verified? And he said, to show that I'm important. And I told him something I wish someone told me a long time ago, Stu. I said, no blue check mark can verify you. You verify you. You were verified the day that you were born, regardless of your faith. You were verified the day that you were born, right? I don't think that's the answer he wanted to hear, but it's something that I
Yeah.
needed to remind myself
Yeah.
and something I needed to tell him as well. As you know, as a speaker, man, the magic happens a lot of times when no one is watching,
Yeah.
right? You've been on stages in front of thousands of people. I've been on stages sometimes in front of 5,000 people, sometimes hundreds of people. But I got to tell you, you have to ask yourself, are you willing to commit to this work? Are you willing to do this work when there's only 3 people out there, right? Are you willing to do this when nobody shows up? Are you willing to recommit to it? Are you willing to do your podcast when you don't, when everyone's talking about, we have over 10 million downloads now? Are you willing to do it when only you get 200 a week, right? And that's where the magic happens, when you're willing to endorse yourself. That's what we're talking
Yeah.
about. And people told me I was crazy again to leave this television industry behind, just like I was crazy to leave that Kraft Foods job. And it took some years to find my footing. But let me tell you something, man. I wouldn't trade in those decisions at all to do what I'm doing right now.
Yeah. And I think you bring up, like, again, goosebumps. It's just like validation, and how sometimes we can go throughout life doing things purely to feel validated, and pursuing careers to feel validated, following the track our parents want us to go down to feel validated, or feel their love, or feel like enough. And I think, like you said, it's just, if you truly want to live a life of fulfillment, a life where you wake up every day and you're excited about what you do, Sunday comes around and you're not having the Sunday scaries, it's because you've allowed yourself first and foremost to say, I am enough and I love
Yes.
myself, and I'm not going to pursue all these different things to seek validation, but I'm going to start with knowing that I'm enough. And then that in turn will lead you exactly where you're supposed to go. Because it even comes into the conversation of, if you know you're enough, then you even get to this process of, do you want to really pursue this job or this thing that maybe you're pursuing it so that you can make $200,000, so that you can, have the thing X, Y, and Z to show everybody you're enough, but you don't really want to actually do that. You're just doing it so one day, 10 years down the road, you're going to know you're enough. And then all of a sudden, 10 years, you get there. And the most interesting thing that happens, and I feel that I've heard this happen in your story and many other stories, is that 10 years later, you get to that point and you have this moment of, I still don't feel enough.
Mm.
Because it's not the event that's going to make you feel enough. It's, at the end of the day, you're the person that ultimately determines how you feel about yourself. So, long story short, long rant short, save yourself a decade, right? And start to build that validation that, I like you said it perfect, by being on this earth, you're
By be-
validated.
And you hit something I'm curious about your perspective on this. And I think what people have to know is this too, is that once you make a decision to pivot, once you make a decision to go in a different direction, like I decided to leave the television industry behind to pursue leadership and development work, I think people think that once they start pursuing their passion, all of a sudden, like there's going to be a rainbow every single day, and there are going to be unicorns running around, and
Yeah.
everything magically is going to work in your favor. Let me tell you firsthand, like transformation is messy. When you make that decision
Yeah.
to pivot, to go the direction, you expect resistance. I can tell you that even though I'm doing work that I love today, there still are many days that it feels like I'm working a shift. And
Yeah.
the differences are folks who are willing to do that, right? The folks who are willing to work that quote unquote proverbial shift. Because just because you make that decision to pursue what you want to do, just know you're going to be challenged. And every single day, the universe is going to say, are you truly committed to what you
Yeah.
say you want? And people talk so much about commitment. And I love the word commitment. It's an important word. What people don't talk enough about in society is recommitment. Because I'm a firm believer
Mm.
that once you make a commitment, every single day you have to wake up and recommit to what's most important. That was yesterday's commitment. You have to
Yeah.
recommit today to living this life you say you want to live. And I think people forget about recommitting every day.
Yeah. So true. Every single day. There's like a saying, it says, uh, rent's not free. It's you got to pay the dues every single day or something like that, where it's like every single day you're paying rent on what type of life do you want to live. And if you're not going to show up for yourself, nobody else is going to show up and say, hey, if you're not willing to put in the work to create the life you want, let me put in the work to create the life you want for you. Like, you got to start with yourself every single day. And if you do that, the interesting part is, whether you want to call it universe, God, whatever, there's an energy out there that people will be drawn to, that whether it's with a career path you're pursuing, whether it's with an entrepreneur endeavor you're pursuing, but when you make that decision to show up for yourself, there's an energy you create where other people start to go, I'm paying attention to this. I'm going to listen. I'm going to pursue this person. I'm going to believe in them, and all that. So I want to transition a little bit here. Eventually you go into corporate speaking, and, you know, you're doing the speaking, you're impacting a lot of lives. But in a sense, what I've heard from your story is you kind of got to this place again, some of the validation, right? Where it's like, I'm speaking on these stages, I'm impacting all these lives. But in a sense, I sort of feel like I'm on this like autopilot. And one of the analogies you share, which I love, you're like, sometimes it's like we're a can of soda and we're being shaken, 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 shaken. And eventually all of a sudden, bam, the can explodes when you least want it to explode. And one thing that I would be curious is, let's say that there's someone on this and they're that can that's shaking and they don't know that they're that can they're shaking because they're on autopilot. What is one or two things that you could ask someone listening to this that would maybe just bring them a little bit of awareness around, am I on autopilot in the first place? And then how do I move from there?
Yeah, I think a couple things come up. One, the last 30 days question that we mentioned earlier is a great
Yeah, yeah,
example
yeah.
based on how you've shown up the last 30 days as it relates to your work, as it relates to your relationships, as it relates to your personal finances, as it relates to your health and diet. We can talk about the last 30 days and what you are or are not doing in so many different categories. So that's one thing I would think about. And then one thing I'd like to think about is I'll tell you a quick story. Is there's an
Yeah.
article I read in the New York Times a few years back, and they're interviewing these two business owners that started a company in New York City in the 1990s. And one of the business owners was talking about how much he missed the old New York, what New York City was like in the 1990s. As you probably know, man, it was a lot more grimy, a little bit different than it is
Yeah.
today. And he kept saying, I miss the old New York. But his business partner corrected him. And he said, you don't miss the old New York. What you miss is the old you, who you were during that time and how you showed up. So for that person watching this, I invite you to think a little bit about the old you. So I reached that point where I checked off all the boxes that society told me to. I was quote unquote successful, had the wife, had the kids, had the white picket fence, etc. But here I was again, not feeling great about life and in a bit of a funk, about to explode like that can of soda. And what I'd realized, Stu, is that at some point I had stopped being bold and I had stopped being courageous. I had started going through the motions. That kid that arrived in New York City with less than $1,000, who was hungry, who was eager, not even a portion of that guy existed anymore.
Yeah.
But everything was good. That was the challenge. The bills were paid, money was coming in, etc.
Right.
I like to think about it like this. I'm not sure if you're a sports fan. I know you have a lot of sports folks on the
Yeah.
podcast, but the question begs, are you playing to win or are you playing not to lose? Those are two
Mm,
different things in life. So think about the football team that goes up in the
damn.
first half 35-0. They're winning the game at halftime. It's 35-0. But then when the team comes out of the locker room for the second half, something happens. That team that you saw in the first half disappeared. And as you know what happens, the fourth quarter comes. They had a 35-point lead. Now they're only up by 3 points.
Yeah.
And there's 2 minutes to go. Like, are they going to win this game? And what happened is the first half, they came out playing to win. The second half, they came out playing not to lose.
Damn.
Those are two different ways to live this life. And I can tell you, I reached a point where I started playing life not to lose. I work with, as a coach, a lot of executives, mid-career professionals. And I find this so ironic. And you're going to smile when I say this. These people that have titles like director, vice president, senior vice president after their names, The reason why so many of them struggle after they get that title is because all of a sudden the things that they did to get that title, once they get the title, they stop doing. They get
Yeah.
safe. They get cautious. And so atrophy starts settling in. The last thing I'll say, man, is I call me silly, man. This is the motivational speaker in me.
Yeah.
But I believe that in many ways we're off Ferraris or Lamborghinis, these fine pieces of Italian engineering. But so many of us, man, are imagine owning a Ferrari, which I do not. I have a Honda Odyssey minivan. Um,
Nice.
but imagine, well, we have another car too. But imagine
Uh,
owning a Ferrari, Stu. And what if you only drove that Ferrari at 35 miles per hour?
Sad.
Ferrari, Ferraris are not built to go 35 miles per hour, right? But many of
Yeah.
us in this amazing body, this minds that we have technically today, we are smarter than we have ever been before in our life. We are. We've collected more data, more experiences. We should be killing it as a husband, as a wife. We should be killing it as professionals because we have more data than ever before. Yet we're playing it safe. We're driving a freaking Ferrari at 35 miles per hour. My challenge for all of you, my challenge for myself, this is for me as well. Everything I
Yeah.
write is for me as well, is to shift gears.
Yeah.
Yes, there are times to go 35. I get it. Around corners and different big
Yeah.
spots,
Yeah.
certain stretches, you go 35. But there are certain times you need to downshift. There are certain times you got to pass somebody on the highway.
You
So
gotta go.
I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I'm getting
Yeah.
fired up over here, man.
Yeah. Yeah. One last thing I want to just share that I heard from you and some research I was doing. And then we'll wrap this thing up here is one of the things you shared. And as I was hearing you share this, I was like hair lifting up off my body. I was like, as you said that in a sense, and it's not an everyday thing, but there's a little bit of an unconscious fear you've developed that one day you're going to be walking around in the city, you're going to be walking around in the street, and you're going to see someone, from back in the day, from high school, whatever, someone that knew you when you were driven, when you were hungry, when you were motivated, when you were pursuing your dreams, and you're going to have a conversation with them. And they're not even going to say it, but unconsciously, what they're going to say with their eyes, with their body language, with their tonality is, you gave up on your life.
Mhm.
And the moment I heard you say it, I was like, oh my God, that conversation is going to ear me for the rest of my life. And I think for anyone listening to this, I think they can relate as well, where it's like, when are you going to have that conversation one day that, with that person, you go, man, you gave up, right? Don't have that conversation. Make it so that when you have that conversation, they go, wow, you were one of the few that did rather than the many that talked. So
Yeah, absolutely, man. That's a great fear of mine that somebody that knew me from back in the day would see me and they wouldn't say it like you said, but they would say, what happened to that guy? He had
yeah,
all the potential in the world. He was so optimistic. He was so positive. What happened? When did he give up? Is what they're essentially asking.
yeah,
And that drives me. And it drives me from a perspective because I know that I have a say in this. I have to remind myself every
hmm,
single day as I get ready to play the victim, get ready to blame this person, that person. I have to point the finger at myself, take accountability, and say, what role have I played in this? And what decision can I make today to make things better? I always like to think about it as 1 degree. I think people think they have to make the breakthroughs come in small steps. People think they have to do those
yeah,
crazy things, quit their job, get divorced, move to a new country. They don't. I
yeah,
ask people right now, what is that 1 degree you can turn it up today to make a difference? Not 5 degrees, not 10 degrees. What is that 1 degree? Maybe it's sending that handwritten note. Maybe it's saying I'm going to write on that right towards my book for 15 minutes. Maybe
yeah,
it's I'm going to research what it looks like to start an LLC. What is that 1 degree you can turn it up? And the great thing about turning it up just 1 degree every single day is slowly but surely you build your own momentum and it works like compound interest. Where you can be in 15 days, 30 days, 6 months
yeah,
from now is a drastically different place where we're just one decision away every single day from making things better. And we're just one decision away from making things absolutely worse. So make them better as opposed to
yeah.
worse.
I love it. So, Antonio, if people want to get more information on you, I know you got the book coming out very soon. Share with people, where can they get more info on you? Where can they see what you're up to? Stay plugged into your world. Let everybody know.
Yeah, the hub for everything, Antonio, is theantonioneves.com, theantonioneves.com. To learn more about the book, Stop Living on Autopilot, go to stoplivingonautopilot.com. And I'll make sure you have those links, Stu.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll put all that in the show notes. And then the last question that I ask everybody, and honestly, you've actually already answered it. But I'm going to see if you want to sprinkle anything else on there. Is I always ask our guests, because this show's all about how people find direction in their life, but through execution. And I always ask everybody, what do you think is one thing someone can do in the next 24 to 48 hours to start finding direction in their life? Now, I know you were saying, what's that 1% that you can make progress towards? I was just curious if you want to sprinkle anything else on top of that before we wrap up.
Yeah, this is gonna be counterintuitive. In this day and age, when we are so busy, we're doing so many different things. I feel like a lot of stuff is not getting accomplished. My challenge for people who are listening to this, too, believe it or not, is to go for a 30-minute walk, but without any headphones and without a phone, and just listen to yourself. Literally go for a 30-minute walk and let you hear your feet hit the ground, hit the pavement, hit the sand, whatever, and see what comes up for you. I think what we're challenged with right now is we don't have enough silence. And in my
Yeah.
experience, my answers tend to come in silence as opposed to distraction. You can listen to another podcast in a little bit. You can take the online course in a little bit. You can watch that show in a little bit. But let me tell you something. There's a reason why amazing things happen when you're in the shower, because you give your brain that opportunity to actually take a deep breath.
Yeah.
Your brain craves that 30 minutes. And let me tell you, whatever problem, whatever challenge you may be experiencing right now, that idea you've been trying to come up with, in those 30 minutes of just walking and just observing, seeing people, seeing trees, smelling whatever you're smelling, so much can come. I'm going to do the same thing today. So I'm going to take my own advice. Give yourself
Yeah.
a
Same.
30-minute walk with no distractions.
Love it. Well, Antonio, this has been a blessing. You are a blessing, my brother. An absolute honor to have this conversation and just so much value. So, thank you for being here, man. We massively appreciate it. I know people are going to get a ton from this conversation. So, thanks, brother.
Thank you for having me. And thank you for how you show up and all that you give to others, man. Thank you.
Absolutely.